I honestly never thought I'd be sitting here, staring at a screen, trying to figure out if I'm the villain in my own life story, or if I'm the only person who had the courage to do what was necessary. But here we are. Imagine waking up one morning as a respected educator with a spotless 10-year record, only to find out by noon that a group of 16-year-olds has launched a coordinated, high-tech smear campaign designed to label you as a predator and get you registered as a sex offender just because you gave one of them a well-deserved C- on a history paper. I was facing the total permanent destruction of my career, my reputation, and my freedom. All because 3 bored, entitled teenagers decided that ruining a man's life was the ultimate high-stakes prank. I had to decide right then and there. Do I play by the rules and hope the truth comes out, or do I descend to their level and use their own digital footprints to dismantle their lives before they can finish dismantling mine? Was I wrong for going as far as I did to protect myself, or would you have done the exact same thing if your entire existence was on the line? I need you to listen to every single detail of how this unfolded because this wasn't just a schoolyard disagreement. It was a psychological war that pushed me to a breaking point I didn't know existed. This story is a warning to every teacher, every parent, and every person who thinks their digital life is safe from the malice of someone with a grudge and too much time on their hands. My name is Mark, and for the last decade, I've dedicated my life to teaching high school history in a relatively affluent suburban district where the property taxes are high and the expectations are even higher. I've always been the kind of teacher who actually cares. I stayed late for tutoring, I sponsored the debate club, and I genuinely believed that every kid had a spark worth nurturing. I took pride in being the person students could talk to when they felt overwhelmed by the immense pressure of our high-achieving community. I wasn't just teaching dates and battles. I was trying to teach these kids how to be critical thinkers and decent human beings. I wanted them to understand that history isn't just a series of events, but a mirror reflecting who we are. But then I met the trio, Leo, Sarah, and Jax. To the rest of the faculty, they were the golden trio. Their parents were the heavy hitters of our town. Leo's dad was a high-profile defense attorney who had successfully defended some of the most questionable people in the state. Sarah's mother was the head of the local hospital board. And Jax's family owned half the commercial real estate in the county. These weren't your typical rebellious kids who skipped class to smoke behind the gym. They moved through the hallways with a sense of untouchable arrogance, wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. They were brilliant, sure, but they were also incredibly manipulative. They had this habit of testing new teachers, finding a weakness, and then exploiting it until that teacher either quit or became their personal puppet. I had watched them systematically break a young English teacher the year before, whispering about her unstable mental state, until she had a breakdown in class and resigned. I vowed I wouldn't let that happen to me. I had managed to stay on their good side for the first half of the year by being firm but fair, but everything shifted during the spring semester, when I caught Leo blatantly plagiarizing a major research project on the French Revolution. It wasn't even a clever attempt. He had literally copied and pasted an entire academic journal entry, including the footnotes and the specific formatting of a PhD thesis. When I called him into my office, I expected the usual excuses. Maybe he was stressed or ran out of time. Instead, he just leaned back in my guest chair, smirked, and told me that his father's donation paid for the new library wing, so we should probably just forget this happened and give me the AI I need for my Ivy League applications. I didn't forget. I didn't blink. I gave him the 0 he deserved, and that was the moment the fuse was lit. The first few weeks after that 0 went into the digital grade book were eerily quiet, which should have been my first warning sign. In a school like ours, usually, the parents are on your doorstep within an hour. But from Leo's house? Nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, his father had actually held him accountable for once. But in reality, they were building a digital gallows for me. The whispers started small, just little glances in the cafeteria that lingered a second too long. I'd walk into the teacher's lounge and conversations would suddenly die, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Then the physical psychological warfare began. I started finding things left on my desk when I'd return from lunch. A single red rose with a note that said, "I know you're watching me." A pair of lace earrings left in my pen drawer, hidden under a stack of grading rubrics. Then a note written in elegant feminine handwriting that said, I can't stop thinking about what you said after class. I'll keep our secret if you keep yours. I never said anything to anyone after class. I was never alone with a student. I immediately took these items to the administration, heart racing. I told the principal, Mr. Henderson, that I felt like I was being set up. He looked at the notes, laughed, and dismissed it as a secret admirer prank or teenage hormones. He told me to have thicker skin and that boys will be boys and girls will be girls. He didn't want to ruffle the feathers of the elite parents. He told me that accusing Leo or Sarah of such things without proof would be career suicide, because of who their parents were. But then the digital harassment escalated. I started receiving anonymous emails from encrypted accounts. Nothing explicit at first, just weird links to articles about teachers being fired for inappropriate conduct or crossing boundaries. I felt like I was being hunted. I started recording every single conversation I had with a student on my phone. I left my classroom door propped open at all times, even during private tutoring sessions in the middle of a blizzard. I lived in a state of constant, low-level panic, feeling like I was walking through a minefield where the mines were invisible, and the map was held by 16-year-olds who viewed my life as a game. Then came the photos. I'd get an email with a photo of my house, taken from the street at 2 a.m. Then a photo of my wife, Clara, getting into her car at the grocery store. No text, just the images. The message was clear. We know where you live, we know who you love, and we can touch you whenever we want. I went back to the police, but they said without a direct threat of, I am going to kill you. Their hands were tied. It was just unsettling behavior from unknown sources. I felt completely abandoned by the system I had served for a decade. I felt like a ghost in my own school. Then, the nightmare truly began in earnest. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the plagiarism incident. I was in the middle of a lecture on the Cold War, ironically talking about the dangers of misinformation and propaganda, when 2 school resource officers and the superintendent walked into my room. They didn't ask me to step out. They did it right in front of 25 staring students. I was called into a formal emergency meeting in the district office. On the conference table was a printed stack of screenshots from a private Instagram group chat, and a series of direct messages. The messages appeared to be from me, sent to Sarah. They were horrifying. They weren't just suggestive. They were full-blown grooming. The Mark in these messages was telling Sarah how beautiful she was, how he couldn't wait for her to graduate so they could be together, and how he would give her extra credit if she met him at a local park after dark. They had used a fake profile generator to mimic my exact handle, my profile picture, and even my writing style, using phrases I commonly used in class, like nuance is key, or consider the historical context. I sat there in total shock, the room spinning, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I'd collapse. I told them it was fake, that I'd never even followed a student on social media, let alone messaged one. But Sarah had played her part perfectly. She had shown up to the counselor's office in tears, claiming she was terrified of me and that I had been pressuring her for months. She had even turned over her phone, which had been carefully loaded with a mirrored conversation thread that looked 100% authentic to the technical illiterate administrators. The digital timestamps matched times I was known to be working late at the school. The school placed me on immediate administrative leave. I wasn't allowed to go back to my room to get my keys or my bag. I was escorted out of the building through the main entrance, right as the bells rang for a passing period. I was paraded like a criminal in front of all my colleagues and students. As I walked to my car, I saw Leo, Sarah, and Jack standing by the entrance, leaning against a wall. Sarah was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. But Leo and Jax were recording me on their phones, their faces a mask of mock concern that hid a deep, dark satisfaction. Leo didn't even try to hide his grin when he caught my eye. He gave me a little wave, a silent, "I told you so." That night, the story hit the local community Facebook groups. The headline was "Local History Teacher Under Investigation for Inappropriate Conduct with Minor." My address was leaked in the comments within minutes. By midnight, my windows were smashed with rocks, and pedo was spray-painted in giant red letters across my garage door. I received hundreds of death threats on every platform imaginable. My wife, Clara, was terrified. She's a nurse, and people at her hospital started whispering about her too, wondering if she was complicit or in denial. We had to move into a cheap, moldy hotel 20 miles away because the harassment at our home was so intense. I felt the walls closing in. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had turned into a psychological thriller. I began to lose my grip on reality. I checked the door 10 times a night. I stopped eating. I'd look at my wife and feel a crushing guilt, like I had brought this plague onto her. The police were now officially investigating, and while I knew I was innocent, I also knew how the legal system worked in this town. Leo's father was the best defense attorney in the state. He knew exactly how to pressure a DA to make an example out of someone to boost his own political standing. I realized that if I did nothing, the truth would be whatever those 3 kids wanted it to be. They had the resources, the money, and the technology. I had nothing but my word, and in the court of public opinion, my word was worth less than 0. That's when I realized that being the bigger person was going to get me sent to prison. I knew these kids. I knew their egos. They weren't just trying to get me fired. They were enjoying the sport of it. They felt like gods who could delete a human being with a few clicks. And people who treat destruction like a sport always get overconfident. They think they are the only ones who know how to use the tools of the modern age. They think a teacher is just an NPC in their life story. I decided to stop playing defense. I contacted a guy I knew from college named Elias. Elias was a digital ghost, a high-level cybersecurity specialist who usually worked for Fortune 500 companies. I took the last of my savings, $50,000, and put it on the table. I told him I didn't want him to just prove the messages were fake. I wanted him to find the source. We spent the next week in a windowless room, diving into the digital exhaust these kids left behind. Elias explained that even with VPNs and encrypted apps, people leave patterns. We started by analyzing the metadata of the screenshots. We found that the images were created on a specific version of a spoofing app that had a unique digital signature. Then, we moved to the school's server. Since the district provided iPads to all honors students, those devices were constantly syncing with the school's cloud. Elias found a shadow account linked to Leo's device that had been used to access the school's faculty directory after hours. But the real goldmine was when we cracked their private Discord server, the Inner Circle. It wasn't just a place to chat. It was a criminal hub. We found logs of them selling stolen Ritalin and Adderall to other students. We found a shared folder of every midterm and final exam for the last 3 years, which they had hacked from the district's main server. They were running a black market within the school. And in the middle of it all was a channel titled Project History. I sat there shaking as I read messages from Leo saying, "He thinks he can give me a C? I'll make sure he never sees the outside of a cell." Sarah replied with, "I've got the crying down. The counselor totally bought it. Poor Mark, he's so easy to break." Jax was the technical lead, explaining how he used an AI voice cloning tool to create the audio proof by feeding it recordings of my lectures. They had spent months planning this. They had even debated whether to plant actual physical evidence in my classroom, but decided the digital route was cleaner. So that is the situation I was in. I was a man with a ruined life, sitting in a messy hotel room with a laptop full of evidence that could either clear my name or potentially ruin the futures of 3 prominent families in town. I had the choice to hand this over to the police and let the legal system take its slow, often biased course, knowing that Leo's father would find ways to suppress digital evidence, claim entrapment, or blame unidentified hackers to protect his son's future. I knew that in this town, justice wasn't just blind. It was often for sale to the highest bidder. Or, I could ensure that these kids felt the exact same fear and public humiliation they put me through. I wanted them to feel the air leave their lungs. I wanted the town to see the rot behind the golden facade. I wanted their parents to see the monsters they had raised in the most public, undeniable way possible. I wanted to burn their untouchable status to the ground. Before I tell you how I executed my final move and the absolute chaos that erupted at the next school board meeting, I want you to pause right now. Go down to the comments and tell me, if you had the power to not just clear your name but to systematically dismantle the lives of the people who tried to put you in prison, would you do it? Or would you just take the high road, and let the law handle it? Would you be worried about the ethics of hacking their private Discord? Or would you burn it all down to save yourself? I really want to know what you would have done in my shoes before you hear what I did next. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about survival. I didn't just go to the police or the district office with a folder. I knew that if I went through the proper channels, the superintendent, who was golfing buddies with Leo's father and relied on those families for political support, would find a way to make the evidence inconclusive, to save the school's reputation and avoid a massive lawsuit. Instead, I waited for the public school board meeting. This wasn't just any meeting. It was the one where they were scheduled to officially vote on my permanent termination and the formal revocation of my teaching license. The room was packed to capacity. There were angry parents holding signs about protecting our children, local news cameras from 3 different stations, and of course the trio sitting in the front row. They were dressed like saints. Leo in a tailored suit, Sarah in a modest floral dress that screamed innocent victim, Jax looking like a preppy scholar. They looked like the pictures of innocence, the kind of kids every parent wants. When the board president called me to the podium to make my final statement, the room hissed. People were literally booing me. One man shouted, "Burn in hell," from the back. I didn't beg for my job. I didn't cry. I walked up to the podium with my laptop and bypassed their internal system using a wireless transmitter Elias had built for me. I forced my screen to mirror directly onto the giant projector screens used for district presentations, overriding their "thank you for attending" slide. I started by playing the audio proof they had submitted against me. The deepfake of me asking Sarah to meet me after hours. The room was silent as they heard my voice. Then I hit a button and played the screen recording of their own Discord server. The audio of Leo laughing about how easy it was to trick the old hags on the board, and how Sarah deserved an Oscar for that crying bit, blasted through the PA system at full volume. The silence that fell over that room was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. It was the sound of 1,000 people realizing they had been played by children. I scrolled through the screenshots of them planning the drug sales, showing the pictures of the pills and the cash. I showed the video of Sarah practicing her fake crying while Jax laughed in the background, telling her to squeeze the eyes harder. I showed the IP logs linking the fake accounts to Leo's house and his father's office Wi-Fi. I showed the project history folder where they had mapped out exactly how to ruin me, including a list of future targets that included other teachers and even the principal's own daughter. The parents of these kids tried to jump up and stop me, screaming about privacy and illegal recordings, but it was too late. The local news was live-streaming the whole thing to thousands of people on social media. I looked directly at Sarah, who was no longer crying victim tears but was white as a sheet, trembling so hard she nearly fell out of her chair. I looked at Leo, whose father was currently backing away from him as if he were radioactive, his political career and legal reputation vanishing in real time. I then pulled up the hit list they had created for next year. Other teachers they didn't like and even a few students they planned to cancel or frame for various things just for fun. The room turned from a lynch mob against me into a lynch mob against those 3 families. People who had been shouting for my head were now looking at those kids with absolute horror. I handed over a physical hard drive to the 2 police officers standing in the back of the room. Officers who were now looking at the trio with very different expressions, and simply said, "I believe you'll find everything you need to start a real investigation here. Not just into the defamation, but into the organized distribution of controlled substances, grand-scale academic fraud, and criminal conspiracy." The fallout was nuclear. Leo and Jax were not only expelled but faced multiple felony charges for the medication distribution and cyber harassment. Because the evidence was so public and so undeniable, no amount of money could buy their way out of it. Leo's father was forced to resign from his firm, and was later disbarred for attempting to influence the initial investigation. Sarah's family moved out of the state within a month out of pure shame. Her reputation as a victim, replaced by her reality as a calculated, sociopathic liar. The principal and the superintendent were forced into early retirement for their gross negligence and failure to investigate properly when I first brought the harassment to their attention. The school board had to issue a public, televised apology to me and pay out a massive settlement for the breach of my contract and the total destruction of my peace of mind. However, The victory felt heavy. I didn't go back to teaching at that school. I couldn't. Every time I looked at a classroom, I didn't see students. I saw potential threats. I didn't see innocence. I saw the capacity for calculated, high-tech cruelty. The joy of teaching had been replaced by a cold, hard cynicism. I ended up winning a massive defamation settlement against the families, which allowed me to start a small consulting firm that helps other educators and professionals navigate digital harassment and protect their online identities. I use my experience to make sure no one else gets blindsided by a group of kids with a smartphone and a grudge. My life is fine now in a material sense, but the person I was, the guy who believed in the inherent goodness of every kid, is gone. I had to become a predator to catch the predators, and that's a weight I carry every single day. I still wake up in the middle of the night wondering if I enjoyed the destruction of those kids a little too much, or if I just did what survival required in a world that had turned against me. Was I the monster for what I did to them, or was I just a man who refused to be a victim? The moral of this whole mess is that sometimes the people you are trying to help are the ones who will try to hurt you the most. And being nice isn't a shield against malice. In this world, you have to be willing to fight fire with a goddamn flamethrower if you want to survive in this digital age. If you think I was right to expose them the way I did, make sure to like this video. If you think I went too far by recording their private chats and exposing their drug use to the whole world, tell me why in the comments. Subscribe for more stories where the good guy has to get his hands dirty to find justice, and please share your final thoughts on this whole mess below. I'll see you all in the next story.